Mm-hmm.
He just may be smarter in the way he studies.
Yeah. And I think, that's an interesting point, because something that I found when I had a number of subjects that I was trying to master, sometimes if I got stuck on one subject, moving on to another one and then sort of focusing on that actually helped me create connection in another subject. And I don't know if you could possibly speak to like the anatomy of that, like the brain, how the brain makes connections and how it builds sort of like lasting memory outside of obviously sleep, etc.
Yeah.
Like how does that happen?
Well, it's quite interesting that sometimes, and this relates to sleep as well, but sometimes if there's a particular issue we're trying to deal with, tell me if this hasn't happened to you. You got a particular thing and you're looking for an answer to it, and you're struggling to find the answer.
Mm.
And you go and do something else, and it comes to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sarah, my wife, did speaking drama as a kid, and she had a teacher who said, Sarah, I woke up bolt upright at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had the idea for your presentation. and why? I suspect that's in the cerebellum, this big chunk of the brain at the back, which has got as many neurons as the rest of the brain,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not conscious.
Mm.
And it seems to iterate and iterate and iterate. It thinks over and over and over things to find a way of doing it.
Which I think, sorry to interrupt you there, which is quite an actuarial concept in the sense that, we build algorithms often. And that's, what you do. You're running numerous scenarios, etc. So it's interesting that your brain does that. And there's a form of modeling called neural networks, which actually simulate the brain. So It's so interesting that you're saying that.
Well, it's exactly that. And it learns the best way to do it. And then it's almost as if your cerebral cortex, which is conscious, will pick up a problem, try and work at it, try and find an answer. And it's almost as if it passes the problem down to the cerebellum, which goes round and round and round and round and round. And then the answer pops up out of nowhere. And in actual fact, it's been working on it, but you're not conscious of it because it's non-conscious.
Yeah.
And suddenly it comes up and there it is.
So,
and strangely, the cerebellum, I think, does the same thing with movement. And you see it with people who play good cricket. If they let their cerebellum control the movement, they often play very fluently. When they consciously think, what is the best way to hit a cover drive and so on, and they think too much about it, they miss the ball, they go out of form, everybody wants to drop them from the And if they just let their cerebellum do the job.
Yeah.
But either way, that cross-fertilization of ideas, it's not as if you're doing Serbo-Croat intensive along with maths and actuarial.
Yeah.
Okay, they're linked subjects.
Yeah.
But staying conscious and staying functional is really important. And the variety, for me, certainly the variety is very important. And then sometimes you'll hit a peripheral patch.
Yes.
And you, like a little bit stuck on a rock, and you just go for it, like playing computer games.
Yeah.
That's lovely. But usually after 30, 40, 45 minutes, your brain's running out of steam.
Yeah.
And there's neural reasons for that too.
Okay.
Like I said, I've got ADD, which you actually knew me. It's been suggested that one of the issues with ADD, I'm not sure if this is true, but it sounds very plausible to me, is that when you're thinking down a particular line of thought, there are certain neurons that are being used.
Yeah.
So you're not using the whole of your brain, you're using a particular group of neurons firing in circuitry. And what actually happens if you're concentrating on something, they can only function so long as they're getting glucose and oxygen at a sufficient level. And what happens to cells around the neurons do the thing, but the cells around which are called glial cells, which when I was at med school, they used to say they're just supporting cells. But it's always much more complicated.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah. And the glial cells seem to feed lactic acid into the neurons.
Okay.
And keep them fed. And one of the suggestions with ADD is that mechanism doesn't work very well.
Okay. And so you can't continue down a pipe because you don't have the sufficient
thing, and eventually your neurons just switch off.
Because they don't have the glucose that they'll
You
need.
have the glucose. The brain runs on glucose
Interesting.
and oxygen, and it can use lactic acid, but blood fats and so on don't help.
Yeah,
And it just runs out of glucose.
sure.
And the suggestion is perhaps what Ritalin does, among other things, because it's always more complicated,
Yes, of course.
is actually somehow boost the capacity of the glial cell
Supply.
to supply the neurons so they can keep going.
Very interesting.
Now, whether that's true, whether that's a myth, the practicality is that particular line of thought, unless you're hyper-focusing, which is wonderful when it happens,
Yes.
line of neurons just get tired.
Yeah.
They're running out of energy.
Yeah.
And so you actually want to give them a break.
Yeah.
And that's why leading on to something else that we're going to talk about is how long should you study?
That was literally my next question, is
Yep.
saying, like, should I be sitting for 2 hours, or is there sort of an optimum time when I should be taking a break? And on top of that, when I do take a break,
Yeah.
what should I be doing in that break so that it actually allows me to come back and be efficient when I'm studying again?
Well, I think you got to be realistic about your studying.
Yeah.
If you really are focusing and you're really into it, you don't want to break it.
Yeah.
So if you're finding, and somebody with ADD people can hyperfocus. If you've got ADD, it's nice to identify that and don't beat yourself up. Face the reality of it.
Yeah.
If you think you may have ADD, go and see somebody about it because it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Okay. But the practicality, if you can go on for a long while, that's fine, but don't kid yourself. That's part of the writing detailed notes, by the way, is the problem. Because you can be writing detailed notes and be doing it, and your brain may be in Japan,
Yeah.
and you're just writing notes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you with the cherry.
And you're doing pretty diagrams and thinking about your girlfriend or your boyfriend or something.
Can't do it now. Yeah. Yeah. It's unproductive.
It's not productive. And so the suggestion is working for more than 40 or 45 minutes is not productive. And they found, for example, that if you give people, briefly, if you give people a list of 20 things to remember, if I gave you a list of 20 words to remember,
Yeah.
the likelihood is you'll remember the first two and the last two and an exciting one in the middle,
Yeah.
and the rest get lost.
Yeah.
And so the suggestion is if you study for an hour and a half, there's a big sump in the middle where you may not actually be learning anything.
Okay.
Okay. That'll vary from subject to subject, but it's good to be fresh in what you do. Okay. Coffee, by the way, maybe coffee's not for you, but I'm a great believer in coffee. And there's a biology to that too. If you're into biosciences, when you've used up all your ATP, which is the kind of energy source in the cell, it ends up producing adenosine.
Okay.
And the adenosine accumulates in the cells. And as the adenosine levels go up, you start to feel tired. Okay. And that's all cells.
Okay.
And what caffeine does is it blocks that tiredness effect of the adenosine, so it makes you feel more awake.
Okay.
And it does help with studying. But don't take so much you don't get enough sleep. Okay.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And don't drink coffee at 9 o'clock at night, because unless you're Superwoman or Superman or something, it means that you sleep.
Yeah. It's going to affect your memory, and you're going to lose everything that you've.
And you can't concentrate the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then when I do take a break, what is the best way to take a break? Should I go watch something? Should I go for a walk? Obviously that does vary from person to person.
Yeah.
But what would you sort of classify as a good break taking technique?
Look, I think even just a little bit of exercise helps. I find if I've had a long double lecture and say to people halfway through, look, it's just cut it and you walk around for 5 minutes and then you sit down again.
Yeah.
Because physically moving wakes you up. It's a thing in the brain called the reticular activating system. And it keeps you awake, basically. And it's complicated, but it keeps you awake. And if you're moving, it's very difficult to fall asleep. I don't know if you found that.
Yeah,
It doesn't
it
matter
is.
how tired you
It's like when you fall asleep on the couch, you walk to your room and then you're like, now I'm awake.
are.
Kind of
It's
thing,
exactly that. But I can remember watching an obstetrics registrar examining a patient about 2:30 in the morning, and he was tired. Now, he examined her fine, spoke to her, examined her tummy, worked out what was going on and whether she was in labor or whatever. And then he went across to the other side of the room, sat at the desk, sat still. It took him about half an hour to write the notes because he'd write half a sentence and have to sleep.
No, shame.
He wasn't falling asleep while he was examining her.
Yes.
Okay. And so movement does wake you up
Yeah.
physically. So, but at the same time, it could be realistic. You say, I've worked for 45 minutes, now I'm going to go on a 7-kilometer run. Well, for you, that might be great, but actually, you don't really learn the hang of a lot running. But again, it's the time efficiency.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the break doesn't need to be for hours on end.
Yes.
But a break, whatever makes you feel good, you know, and whatever won't distract you.
Yeah.
Your cell phone.
That was my next question, is that, I mean, I remember when I would study sometimes in like the library at uni, and, you know, you would study for 45 minutes, an hour, and then for my break, I would just take out my phone, you know, and then you're just scrolling on your phone. But I didn't necessarily feel like that was a good break because I was still very stimulated because, you know, you're getting various stimulus to your phone, whether that is, you know, Instagram or whatever, like answering messages. So would you suggest not being on your phone for a break just because of that stimulus?
Well, I think physically moving is a good idea. If you drink enough coffee, you've got to physically move every 45 minutes because you've got to go to the bathroom. So that's an advantage,
necessity.
whether or not.
Yes,
and coffee is also a diuretic. Okay, so actually physically moving, and not 100 miles, just, you know, physically moving for 5 minutes. Go and walk down the stairs, get yourself another coffee, get yourself something to eat or whatever, whatever it is, so that you're physically active. And then get back in a realistic time frame. For me, now I'm old now and I haven't had a smartphone for very long.
Yeah.
Because I can get into it and I can spend hours eating the stuff I'm not interested in.
Yeah. But it's like just, it's there. And it's
designed by
like, oh, okay.
intelligent people who know how to hold your attention. And they grab your eyeballs and you do. You know? And the reality is, reading about the war in Ukraine doesn't teach you actuarial science.
Yeah.
No matter how strongly you feel about it.
Yeah.
Not going to help you in the exam.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by all means do that, but just be real.
Yeah.
Just be real and realistic. And if you have ADD, you're going to get distracted.
Yeah.
If you're a human being, you're going to get distracted. But some horrible people don't get distracted.
Superhuman.
Yeah.
So I think another thing I would ask there is, and it's a little bit of a segue, but I spoke to actuarial exams having different focuses as you sort of progress along your journey. So the earlier sort of disciplines are very conceptual. So there it's very calculation based. And then as you get closer to qualification, it becomes a lot more strategic and you're almost building ecosystems of understanding.
Yeah.
How would you suggest, and I know people do have different studying techniques, but studying for a calculation-based exam and studying for like a strategy exam where you're writing out answers, how would you approach those differently? Because I often see with my students, because I lecture first year, so it's very calculation-based, and then I lecture my fourth years, and it's very much strategic. And I see that they struggle to make the transition from the calculations to sort of interpreting and saying, you know, what's the environment that we're working in? How would you sort of suggest, from a cognitive perspective and from your educational perspective, going about that and changing study techniques?
Yeah. I think there's another basic concept which is helpful. And that is, you've got to say strategically, what do they want?
So actually, almost it's like a metacognition almost, right? It's
Yeah.
like thinking about thinking. So before I start thinking, I need to think about what it is that I need to be thinking.
What do these people want to?
Yeah.
Okay, what does Margie want of me? And she wants me about to do this mass, this mass, this mass, this and that.
Yeah.
That's the way it is. And you've got to be hardcore about that.
Yeah.
Because again, I grieve about students that they've It is straight from the textbook. And I think it's a particular hazard if people don't come to lectures.
Yeah.
Because if you don't attend lectures, leave aside